Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I give special thanks to Pastor Coye Bouyer for being able to spend some time with us today. He and I have had several discussions talking about all of the volatility in our society today, and wanted to try to share. Good way to put it. We wanted to try to connect and see if we could share some of our thinking. I think, and I have to say this. I know. Pastor Boyer's been a pastor for more than a decade now, but I have to say, one of the things that I've always appreciated about him, and I think the reason we continue to have these conversations, continue to engage like this, is because he's open-minded. Not that he doesn't have beliefs, not that he's not firm on beliefs, but he's willing to listen. And of course, then share some of his background and experience. And I think that's what's been really fueling this relationship. So.
Sure.
Pastor, we ran into each other just over a decade ago as you were new here in Lansing.
Well, I was not new in Lansing, but the church was new because I started it up. Yeah. So growing up here most of my life and outside of my time in Dallas, where I got my seminary degree, upon coming back, then it was a matter of, hey, got to get involved in ministry. So part of a couple of churches, and then decided to start up my own church. And so when you start up your own church, you don't really have a place to meet, and you don't have any people to meet with. So I found myself going to Tim Hortons down the street from the church that we knew we were going to be in, and just trying to meet people and talk to different individuals. And I remember that you, as well as a few other officers at different times, would come in, and I would be there. And so a couple of times it just prompted me to ask you all some questions about your job, about your lives, and kind of introduce myself.
You were good at that personal connection. I have to give you that. It's no wonder your congregation has continued to grow.
It does help. It does help. You can connect with people. It helps.
And you did that, and that over the years, and like I said, I think that open-mindedness has allowed us to have some pretty poignant discussions at some times. As I left law enforcement and branched out on my own, we've stayed in touch, even though it was no longer a neighborhood issue. So
that's true.
So we wanted to talk today about this defunding the police thing. I know it's been a hot topic. I know there's all kinds of definitions about it. So why don't we start there? How do you define the defunding the police movement?
Well, okay, so I didn't come up with the term, so I would define it based upon those individuals who have been defining it. And for the most part, what I can gather is it's kind of a few different looks from the different vantage points of the people who are really defunding the police. And so it is this sense of reallocation of funds in the police. It is reforming the police as a second option. And then the one that I think gets the most, like most press is the actual removing them altogether. I think somewhere between that one and giving them less money as a whole is like the one that everybody is most on, and probably is the one that the different groups who have asked about defunding the police probably more along the lines of where they stand at, is more taking money away from police, or in the extreme sense, just canceling them out altogether.
Well, and that's we've already had part of that conversation. Neither of us are proponents of removing the police. I think that leaves us in a bad spot in society. Yeah.
Sure. Not to mention that while you would not have police in a theocratic type governing body, meaning God is in control, like in Israel, there are no police. In a democratic society in which we exist in and we live in, obviously, that's a part of the governing authorities that is put in place to help bring civil justice to the people. So yes, I don't think in our current system it would work to where you did not have some type of police or civil servants who function like our modern day police do.
Well, I certainly know that there are plenty of folks that I ran into that would like to have gotten rid of the police, but that's usually because those were the folks we were carting off to jail, and they wanted their freedom to not go to jail. There wasn't that. There was that respectful group that, yeah, I messed up. You got to do what you got to do.
Sure.
I think there's that strong element that just doesn't want any governance.
Yeah. And you know, that being said, while I would agree, I think that the majority of people initially who would have said defund the police, like none at all, would be people who are being directly impacted or arrested by the police. I think due to what we're seeing today in our society with social media, there are probably those who have not had direct contact with the police in that
Right.
type of manner who would say, you know what, I'm kind of leaning towards it too, because the police seem like they are doing some things that they should not be doing too often, and it's concerning. So not that I fall in that camp, but I do understand those individuals, again, not directly dealing with the police, but after seeing what you're seeing, it's like, nah, if you don't function like this, no, I'd rather not have you.
Right. No, I think there's that portion of the movement has really gained a lot of steam because there are a lot of people out there that are questioning the police. And as a police officer, I'm not usually one of those. There are very few times that I look at what police are doing, and I'll be upfront about that. We've had that conversation because I think I look at it from that perspective, and we've had multiple conversations on that. But I think there is a lot of people out there that don't have any understanding of what's going on. And when all you see is that negative news clip, right? It doesn't matter if it's one officer or, I mean, in your mind, it goes to every officer being in that. And I think that's where a lot of this is coming from. So I think there's a lot of understanding that we need to increase. Where do you see it coming from?
You know, honestly, I think that you got two narratives here. I think that both narratives have a vantage point that is legitimate and true. And I think that the vantage point narrative that I am kind of hearing the most just from the Black Lives Matter movement, and then those who have dealt with the justice system who think that it is unjust in the way it's dealing. I think that in one sense, it is this concept of it's corrupt. And it's not corrupt because the laws per se are corrupt. The people who are responsible to execute the laws, they're corrupt. And if that's the case, then we would rather not have you. Which makes that part makes total sense to me.
Right.
If you're corrupt, you need to be removed. And so if removing you means we reform you from within, or we give you less money so that way some folks won't sign up. We get the ones who are really motivated by the passion for the job and to protect and serve people. Then in some sense, it's like, yeah, you know, I can be all for defunding the police if it's going to remove certain people or only bring to the surface those who really want to be there. Especially since I'm feeling like your existence is partly to abuse me because of the color of my skin or because of the class or part of the city in which I'm growing up in, or even choose to live in.
Well, I think there's a few. I don't think there's a few. There's a handful. There's a smorgasbord of solid topics in there that we could delve into. Because one of the areas that I agree with you on is that the system is broken. There are plenty of flaws in our system.
Yeah.
So I see, unfortunately, what I see is a lot of current violence taken out against the people who are the face of that system. I think that's a whole different issue. Like we need to make systematic changes. We have to change the way the whole government system applies everything.
Sure.
Looking at, then train those individuals to do that new work. So we started with defunding the police. We're way over here in the needs of our system. And I think as a society, we need to be open about that conversation. And I think
that's good. Yeah.
The movement really is trying to capture all of that, isn't it?
Yes. I think it is trying to capture all of that. Unfortunately, because we are human beings and we have our particular passions or particular focal points that are steered by our preferences, we pull apart the big picture for the little small pieces that make a picture. You know, if I have a puzzle and I take away a few pieces, well, you may be able to still tell what the picture is, even if I take away a few pieces. But I'm here to tell you that if those few pieces is all I'm gonna focus on, because I've been that person who got to the end of a puzzle. You can't find that last piece. Forget about the fact that, you know, the puzzle is 99% put together. Where's this one piece? And I think that our preferences guide us down the road of only focusing on certain pieces of the problem, and then we lose sight of the problem.
Well, and I completely agree and wholeheartedly understand that, because if you and I are face to face, I can address you.
Yeah,
I can't
sure,
address,
sure.
I can't address the systematic problem that I can't put a finger on or talk to or even write about. I
would
know
agree.
there's a problem there, but you and I are going to go head to head then.
Yes.
And so I don't disagree that there's plenty of police training that can be done.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm on the other side of the issue. To accomplish, to get police force to be where you, like where this conversation is taking us, where people want them to be,
Mm-hmm.
it's like business. You can't take money away and expect greater results. And
Sure.
when you're talking about things like training and providing services and the quality of officers you have, more money needs to go into all of that. You get better people, and you look across the realms of police work, you know, you get, I don't want to dog on my cohorts, and I was one of those local people, but you get a little better pay if you move to the state level. So that you get the guys that want to make a difference in the city, but a lot of guys who are, you know, have the opportunity, they'll go to the state or the federal government level and they get hired away that way. And there's more training at those levels. So you get a different, and certain areas, look across our country, even in those small localities, you get certain areas that don't pay very well for officers. They don't expect
Right.
much in training, right? They don't expect much in certification. They're happy to give you a badge and a gun and say, go do, versus agencies that continually train all the time in a wide variety of areas, from physical confrontation to verbal skill sets to managing mental health issues. And thankfully, I happen to work for one of those agencies and spend a lot of time getting additional training. But not everybody has that opportunity. And that's a whole different, do we need then a greater governing agency to look at that and standardize officers training and agencies and how they handle things? That's
Sure.
But again, that's a money issue, right?
Yeah. And I think the thing too is, because of the focal point or the focus of each group or each individual on a certain aspect of the problem, again, it blinds us to the bigger problem. But let's ask some really hard questions, just from the perspective of maybe Black Lives Matter movement or those individuals who are saying defund the police. So I'm a pastor, that's my profession. And each year, you know, I preach and I try to meet people, I try to invite them to church, and whether it's at like a Tim Hortons restaurant, talking to officers, or just people I come in contact with on the street, I'm constantly trying to grow the church. Well, if at the end of the year, you know, we've done pretty well and church looks like it's, you know, going to be here for another year and it's time to talk my salary for the next year, sure, I can stand before my board and the people and say, hey, you know, this is what it is. This is kind of how we did, and I would like more. And they will make a decision based upon what has come in, based upon my work, and also how they feel about me too, because sometimes my work can be good, but they may not like me. So they make a decision based upon those factors. But if somewhere during that year, I had an extramarital affair with some woman in the church, or, you know, a couple of times throughout the year, I was found out that I had stolen, you know, a couple of dollars from the offering plate. If I'm asking for a raise at the end of the year to go into the next year, no doubt that I may need that raise, no doubt that I'm stressed at times, no doubt that it would be very beneficial, no doubt that the majority of my work that year has reflected that I have done what I needed to do to grow the church. But I gotta tell you, from probably a good number of members' perspective, they might be like, Pastor, I don't know that you need to get a raise in this situation. So I think that from some people's vantage point, and people look like me, obviously, and even at times myself, when I see some of the things taking place with different police forces throughout our nation. So it's not like just one city or one sheriff's county or department. I mean, it's kind of just running throughout. There's a piece here that says, why in the world would I give you more money for more training? So now you got more money, why you beat me up? why you abuse me, or why you put me in, like, that's like, I don't know that I want to pay you more for that, because what you demonstrated is that with what you've been given, you still won't do right with certain parts of your job that directly affect me as a person of color living in an inner city. And although it's not Detroit or, you know, major metropolitan like Dallas or Houston or somewhere in Florida, it's still, I'm living in an inner city. And, you know, as the LSJ did an article the other day saying that, you know, LPD are actually more likely to arrest 4.5% young men who are Black than anybody else. That, you know, well, that's me. That's my 2 sons.
Right.
So from that narrative, you know, it's like, again, it's not that I wouldn't need more money. It's not that it would be beneficial. Not that I'm not stressed. Not that I don't need more training. But there are certain aspects of my job that I'm failing at so badly that they're going to overshadow kind of the other work performance of your job and even the stressors of that job. And you don't get more money in situations like that. We actually find a new pastor.
Well, and so here we have to differentiate, I think, a little bit between the individual issue and the societal and systemic issues, right?
Sure.
Because we're talking about, you know, you use the example you just shared where your pastor has an issue. Well, there are some people who stop going to church. That's it. They're done.
That's right.
They're done. It's over,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But those people are very few. Most people say, well, we need to look at some services. Maybe our pastor needs counseling, right? You get those folks to the folks that say, hey, we need a new pastor.
Yeah.
And most people fall somewhere in there. And then there you get the other side of folks that are just like, nope, he's our pastor no matter what.
Yes.
He's going to lead our church, right? So you've got that wide variety. And if you look at now, switch the situation, put it back in police work, I think you have the same thing. You have some people that they're just done. You know, that cop beat up somebody in New York and that's it. All cops are bad. I think most people fall in the middle, and that's where we have to look at things because, you know, we have to look at the individual situation. That individual might have been overstressed, overtaxed, overworked. We've talked about some of those individual situations. They might need some extra counseling or some extra training, or they might need to be gone.
Sure.
So there's a difference there, I think, between removing your pastor and quitting the church. And that's really where I think we need to look at society, because we're talking about individuals that are demonstrative of societal issues.
Yep, sure.
But if we you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
I would agree.
Right?
I would agree.
So now how do we modify? And I think it has to be a multi-pronged approach. You know, a lot of the defunding movement says we need additional services.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we need more mental health care. We need more social workers. We need more, certainly, children's protective services workers, right? We need more intervention. And to get that, we have to take money away from the police. Well, you're saying that the result you want is greater care for our people, but then you're putting the people that are the front line in a greater stress situation. And now you go back to 2011 when the Bush tax cuts went through.
Yep.
Police agencies across the nation lost officers. In many cases, 33% of their patrol officers. So now you've automatically given those same people time and a half their job to do. If they're taxed to begin with, which they should be.
They
right?
are. Yeah. They are, though.
Now you've overstressed the situation. So how do you get them to fix that problem? Everybody has bad days. So let's look at it this way. If you have a bad day, you know, you're really upset about everything that's going on in life, and somebody walks in to your office and says, Pastor, I need help.
Yeah.
Now I know you're going to say, okay, give me a minute. You're going to turn around, you're going to get a little attitude change, and then you'll come back and you'll help them out.
You see me on bad days, huh?
I don't know that you have bad days, but I know you wouldn't feel a certain way. But I think especially as this goes out to people, that has to be a question we ask ourselves. How do I respond to people on bad days? I just had a bad day with my wife the other day. Started both our mornings out horribly just because I was in a bad mood. And I had to go back and apologize to her and make amends and work on repairing that relationship. When a police officer has a bad day in the wrong moment, we're talking things go horribly bad for at least one other person, if not multiple people. So
yes.
If we're stressing them more, I don't see how that helps us resolve the issues that we're dealing with.
And I would agree. I think that when we stress them more, that actually makes a lot of the situation worse. Like you said, stress, low pay, underappreciated, and you're already dealing with a society or a group of people within society that, can be very, very taxing and very, very traumatic. At the same time, it's a lot of work. And so that all that is true and legitimate, and measures need to be taken towards that. I think the problem comes with regards to defunding the police from the standpoint of, hey, let's give them less money, is because when officers make these mistakes because they had a bad day, because they were overstressed, there is no consequence, or the consequence is so minimal that then individuals whom are feeling like we went after the justice route and we keep getting the same thing. The officer stays in place. If he is let go, he just transfers to another department because he has the ability to do that. He's working someplace else. Let's look at it. Yesterday morning, of course, yesterday afternoon and this morning, you get up, you hear about the Breonna Taylor case. One person wrote in kind of a comment, just dealing with the fact that there was no justice. One person wrote, well, she really wasn't all that innocent. And I mean, so this justifies her being shot in her bed. That just seems weird that the shooting is justified. And we know that there's some other things that took place. I'm not saying the officer goes to prison just yet, but it's like, with no need to bring any charges, this was a justified shooting. I don't understand how I can be sleeping in my bed and I get shot and there's not really a strong repercussion. Now, now they paid the family $12 million saying, it shouldn't have happened this way, but the shooting is justified. Well, I find that kind of like, so what's going to happen next? I mean, if you don't have the protests and the outrage and uproar, something's going to happen, but that's an issue. Well, yesterday morning, before all that happened, the charges against Robert Kraft all get dismissed. If what they're saying is legitimate, they actually have video and audio tapes of him getting oral sex in a massage parlor by someone who is probably either an illegal immigrant or, if not illegal, undocumented, plus potentially stolen. And he's paying for it. This is what we call prostitution. But because he really wasn't a part of the investigation, we didn't have the right to do this, whatever legal parameters and loopholes were found, this that we know is wrong, and people are going to prison and jail for prostitution on a much smaller level. He's just gonna walk away free. I gotta tell you, man, while it may be the law, that's not just.
No, there are plenty of examples like that, I think, where the justice system is broken, and that's you'll run into a lot of police that feel that way. I think that it's that we have to have more conversations, we have to have more communications, because 98% of those police officers, they're just out there trying to do their best, just like you and I are just trying to do our best to get through life, right?
Sure.
And benefit of the doubt aside, most of them do a very good job most of the time. So
I would assume so.
It's how do we get an understanding of exactly what happened with Breonna Taylor nationwide? How do we communicate from top to bottom? Here's exactly what happened. Here's what was going on. And I know we're starting to get a little long on time, but one example I use continually, you can look up Texas teen pool party, and there's an officer there who runs in. He starts throwing people on the ground. Kids are making fun of him. He pulls out his gun and he's pointing his gun around. And I use that example because it was big news, right?
Right.
Obviously, the guy was past his stress level, right? There is nowhere in police training where you're taught to throw a person on the ground and then go running after another person.
Right.
If you're taking somebody to the ground, it's for a good reason. They've done something, they're going to jail.
Yeah.
Right? Obviously, he passed that point. Now, if that's all you see, that's a horrific incident, right?
Mm-hmm.
He looks, because the individuals he was interacting with were black teenagers, he looks racist as the day is long.
He does.
If you go into his, and this is where I'm saying we need to go with all of these incidents, if you go into his history, just that day, the 2 calls before that were suicide calls. One where he talked to a young, I believe it was a young female, down from committing suicide.
Okay.
And the other where he dealt with an African-American family whose husband had just committed suicide, and he walked them through that whole mourning process, right? And he was on his way. He had checked out of service. He was on his way to go back to the station and decompress when there's this call for assistance. Now, I'm not excusing what happened, right? I'm not saying he was right in that, but when you put in, he just saved somebody's life and helped a family through one of the worst traumatic incidents that you could possibly go through.
Sure.
And he's got all that stress compiled on him. You can see where a little taunting and adrenaline and things go bad. So I think, and again, I don't think we know everything that happened with Brown and Taylor and the whole investigation and why things went that way. And so how do we share that? Because we make judgments as individuals based off of what we hear, whether it's true or not.
Sure. And that's a good point. And I see that vantage point and that side from it. But it still comes back to, at the end of the day, was what happened right or wrong? Or was it a tragedy or not? And so I think in Breonna Taylor's case, with what we've been given so far, it's a tragedy. This woman should not have been shot. Nothing she did said that should have happened to her, but it did. And so now you got to deal with the fact that it happened. One officer was let go because the bullets he shot went into the wall and could have hit an innocent party in the connecting, apartment. Well, first of all, when you come in shooting guns, I mean, you don't control the bullet. It goes where it goes. But this officer gets, shooting bullets unwantonly, and he's dealt with, from that standpoint, saying that he should have did a better job at making sure innocent people were protected.
Right.
Well, if they would have shot her boyfriend, because he shot at them, right? You can make a case for it, man. He shot, whether we announced or not. He shot. But she's not shooting. To me, another innocent party not only was in the way of a crossfire, but actually was shot and killed due to the behavior and actions of those arresting officers. And so you still have to deal with the fact that maybe this is not prison in life, maybe this, but there's got to be something in here that says it was negligence that took place that led to an innocent person dying. And we want to consider all the surrounding circumstances that will help us determine the right penalty or punishment for what has taken place. But when it's like, no, it was justified.
Yeah, and I think that's the knife edge of where we need to come together in all of this, right? Because I don't think we can put this on, as soon as we label it a police, right? We've got it, then it becomes defensive. Then police feel, well, no, that's not all of us, and we have to get defensive with that. As soon as we say it's black males, or as soon as we, as soon as we start categorizing and stereotyping and generalizing, now we get more issues. And I think
we do, but unfortunately, that's how police are trained, to generalize and stereotype. Let me say something. That's not always bad. Like, there are certain things. Hey, I stereotype. Okay, like we all use stereotypes and generalizations based upon information we have gathered to protect ourselves. So So I'm not going to say that it's totally wrong or bad to, use generalizations and stereotypes. It becomes bad, of course, obviously, when we start to put everybody in this category, and everybody shouldn't be in this category, and we're doing it by skin color, we're doing it by uniform.
Well, exactly. I've got to correct you on one thing, though, because police training is not to stereotype. There's no stereotype. There's profiling, but profiling is looking for proven categories that correlate to crimes. And that's different from generalizing, because generalizing takes a group of people and puts them in one category. Profiling is the opposite. We're looking for a category that, so take a burglary crime. You have to prove that certain things happen, that somebody entered the home unlawfully, that they did so by forcing entry.
Sure.
And depending on the type of burglary, they intended to steal something from within, right?
Right.
So if I don't prove those three things, I don't have a burglary.
Okay.
Right? If you walk into my house, you don't intend to steal anything, you just wanted to take a look around, that's an unlawful entry, that's not a burglary.
Sure.
And with a profile, it works the same way. So that might be part of the misnomer that creates this angst. Well, police are just stereotyping. They're just looking for, black guys to arrest, to throw in jail. and I mean, we've had that discussion. I walked that beat 20 years.
Sure.
I met with officers all across the country, and there's no training that advocates that. Now, I understand that there are a lot of, and you and I have had this discussion too, there are a lot of circumstances that put more black males in police line of sight and in jail than any other category.
Right.
And I don't agree with how all of that comes out.
Sure.
But I can tell you, most guys aren't out there just looking for those guys to arrest and throw them in.
Well, and that's a good point. So the question then becomes, so you use profiling as a way to, put people in a category that may be most likely. So their actions, kind of what they do, or legitimate things that say this was breaking and entering as opposed to like unlawful entry, right? So as officers, did you ever profile someone based upon, the profile, and they weren't doing what you thought they were doing? They didn't fit they fit the profile, but that's not what they were doing.
Yes, and so that's, now you should, and I'm not saying everybody does, right? I'm not here to represent all police.
Right.
Right? But you should be looking, and here's what profiling is really geared to do. Just like salesmen, a vacuum cleaner salesman isn't going to apartment condos.
Right.
You're not going to sell a lot of vacuums in the apartment complex. You want to go to the big homes, right? Where before they get to maids, right? So they have a certain group of people that they're looking for to sell vacuum cleaners.
Sure.
If I'm looking for drug dealers, there's a certain area that I want to be looking for drug dealers. If I'm looking for bank robbers, I don't want to be sitting in the strip mall or in the shopping center, right? Right?
Go to a bank, right?
you go look around banks.
Yeah.
So that's where profiling gears you to a direction, right? We had a sergeant who'd always get us to go out and look for stolen cars. Well,
okay.
Cars generally, when they're stolen, they either go to chop shops or they're used in transportation. So you gear your time to look around those areas. Now, if you're profiling, there are areas that we know statistically that those cars show up in, right? So I can go into those areas. If I see one of those cars, now I can take action on it. So if I'm profiling with you, if I'm looking for somebody, and there's a point where we can have a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
There's a point where you're now showing me you're not in criminal action. It's time to shake hands and say goodbye.
Sure.
Right? So I think there's another, and I've seen this in my own kids, teenagers today especially, get this, well, I don't want to. Well, just because you don't want to doesn't mean you don't have to. Right?
That's true.
There are things that we have to do in society today.
Yes.
And I think people get into that when an officer stops them. If you don't want to be stopped and talked to, that doesn't mean you don't have to stop and talk just because you don't feel like it, right?
Well, and that's true. So, all right. So what you described as profiling, some people would mix that with stereotyping. They would say, hey, because to some degree they at times do intersect because they're similar concepts. They're similar in nature. But I'm going to admit, and I've already said it, that to some degree there's a level of profiling that just takes place. I mean, it's just what we do.
Sure.
So that being said, unfortunately, too often in the profiling type of looking at people is you're put in certain places, usually in situations as an officer where it's a lower income community, it's a little bit more poverty. It looks a little bit more like me in a lot of cases than it does you. And the assumption is, well, a lot of drugs happen down here. But man, I gotta tell you, there's lots of drug dealers in the suburb and their police different. Now, some of that is because they had the money and the resources, hate to keep saying this, Robert Kraft, who you can ward off certain things. And so at that moment, because I don't have those same resources, well, I guess it sucks for you. I mean, because we caught you. So like drugs and crime is happening, in my opinion, at some of the same rates in both communities. Now, why it may look a little bit differently, it's the same idea. I mean, whether I'm bribing the woman, whether I'm telling the woman she better not tell on me and I'm like, I'm gonna beat you up, or I'm bribing the judge.
Right.
I mean, it's a crime. And too often what happens in communities that look like mine or communities with lower income is police come in with the profile. And because I'm gonna be honest with you, nobody's innocent. We all committing crimes. When you realize what crimes are, like what a crime actually is, and even talking to you, the things that you can pull me over for, it's like, come on, man, you put me over for what? You're fishing. Well, you might find something, but you're not fishing with the rest of the population the same way. You're fishing with me because I'm in the profile area and I look like maybe I could be it because I'm in the type of car or whatever. And so it's like, yeah, well, if you pull over 5,000 people in one area and 500 in another area, obviously you're gonna have more people. Yeah. And who wants to fund that? I mean, honestly, I don't really want to fund that because of the abuse behind it. So yeah, there's a piece of me that would like to see, you know what, I want to get rid of the garb that's there now. Some of them just need to go because they're a part of the systemic problem. So the law is not the problem. It's the executioners of the law. Same thing in biblical times. God's law, there's no problem with God's law. But at times the priests and the judges and the elders are taking bribes. They're robbing the people at times, taking advantage of them. And God is like, get them out because you don't want to be, get out. He doesn't destroy the priesthood. He doesn't destroy the elders or the concept of it. It's like, but y'all got to go. And in our country, man, there is a protection of law enforcement by the individuals who have the most power to do something that if you're on my end of the spectrum, you're like, what else do you do? You want me to have confidence in the justice system, but too often we see it doesn't look like it's justice for people who look like me. And then the people who you then put in place to actually execute the justice too often seems like they think I'm the one committing the most injustices or the most crimes. And yeah, why would I want to fund that?
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I think we delve now, there's a huge issue behind that. You know, why is there more enforcement in those areas than there are in other areas? Where do we go as a first step towards getting some of this resolved?
We just did it. We had a conversation. Nobody yelled and screamed and said, I'm gone, and hung up on And so I think it starts, you have a conversation. It starts there. Let's talk. So I need to hear as a Black male, 21st century American, what your vantage point is as a white male, 21st century, not only American, but one who has been in law enforcement for 20 years. Because if I hear about the stress and I hear about kind of what you're dealing with, it helps to paint a better picture of who you are, as opposed to the only picture that I get when I watch the news, right? The other day I was watching Dr. Phil, and it was a recorded one from before COVID, but they talked about how officers do not like to call for help when they're struggling with suicide because of the taboo associated with it. And then the fact that it just destroys your opportunity to advance because you're considered weak. So officers who are really struggling, have a lot of stress, will at times just try to manage it, leading to suicide of their own personal suicide, maybe beating, killing their wives, spouses, children, or the citizens they're supposed to serve and protect because the help is not there. Man, as I'm listening to this, I'm like, dang, that's jacked up. Like my heart is like, I didn't know that. I mean, I know it, but I wasn't consciously thinking about it. And so now it's put in my face. So in that moment, it's like, dang, and my heart goes out to the wives or to the children or to the officers themselves, or actually the spouse, because sometimes it's a female officer. So the spouse and the children. But then I flip the channel and I see a black dude being shot. It's like, oh man, you know what? So having the conversation so that way you can hear my vantage point and what I'm experiencing and trying to be empathetic towards it, because you're hearing it. Because it may not be your experience, and it may not be kind of even what you've seen outside of just what you've been seeing the last 9-10 months or so. So that way we begin to understand and like where other person is coming from and take more of a holistic approach to figuring out what the next step is.
Well, I think it's pretty safe to say that you and I did not grow up with the same set of experiences.
Obviously. Too bad for you.
I think, as much as we might want to, as much as people want to have that opportunity to walk in somebody else's shoes, it really doesn't happen. But I think I agree with you. These conversations are the best opportunity that we have to open our minds to the way somebody else has lived through their life, to gain that perspective and to share a perspective. And really, I think ultimately to work towards a solution. Obviously, we're a ways away from doing that.
Yes.
But I think it's the effort that makes the difference. So
I will say something else too that's important, and this is maybe you won't like this, but I do think that law enforcement has to deal with the fact that abuses of power and authority have taken place in that particular field, even if it's a smaller number. And instead of personalizing it, like I'm saying, hey, you're the bad officer, you have to accept the fact as law enforcement that, man, we have really messed up. And I say that from the vantage point of people who will come to me and say, well, my last pastor burned me, or I had a bad experience, the leadership was horrible. I get that all the time. And I don't then start off, well, sometimes being a pastor, I'm sorry. I hug them because their experience is legitimate, and it does no good for me to try to explain away their experience or try to defend my colleague who, even sometimes I feel like the pastor be right because they didn't steal nothing. You didn't like his answer, or you didn't like the way he preached. That's on you. But instead of dismissing this, because they're hurting, and too often I think law enforcement, you hear the hurts of people looking for help or a population looking for help, and you hear the hurts, and then you take it personal, like, now I'm saying you're the cause of it, when in actual reality, you are the answer. You're the answer, which is how I feel when people come to me about their church experience. I feel like I'm the answer. I'm not the cause of your pain, and I don't want to, dismiss the pain. I want to actually embrace you as I accept the painful experience you're sharing with me, because I'm in the same position as the one who hurt you to now be able to help you.
Right. Well, I'll take that and go one further and then respond. I agree. I think officers, whether time pressure, whatever the reason is, I don't think they're great listeners. Certainly not after a couple of years. I think it gets.
Your honesty.
I think it gets grilled out of. I think it gets worn out, and you start dealing with situations. Yeah, it's another domestic. I've been there before. You're walking into the situation. It's citizen complaint. Yep, I've taken 100 of them. Sign here. And you get a little dismissive. So I think not only do officers need to be more empathetic, better listeners in that, I think and I'll throw myself into this, we need to hold ourselves more accountable. We need to be able to call each other out, not afterwards.
Right,
Getting on
right.
social media, guys, if you're listening to this, getting on social media afterwards does us no good. Stop it in the minute.
Yes.
And that's tough, right? I mean, there might not be anybody around, right? So that's a tough situation. I think the other side of that is, as a society, when an officer tells us to do something, you got to be willing to put your hands up, behind the back, whatever they tell you to do, and fight it later in court.
You know what?
The time to fight it is not to get on your phone and say, watch, I'm running from the police. That doesn't work out so well.
You know what? That's an excellent point, and that is a hard one as a citizen to swallow. But you are right. I have learned in my dealings with all police encounters that I've had, when I have just simply complied, it has gone well, which speaks to your point about the majority of the time, the majority of officers, I believe, are there to do their job. And while they even may be a little scathed towards a certain population or just towards the work that they do at times, for the most part, if you comply and respond, it is usually it's a pretty good, as good of an experience as it can be. Because nobody likes being pulled over. Nobody likes being stopped or even asked.
I don't like being stopped.
Right. So it's as good of an experience as it can be, unless you're just dealing with that individual who has decided they're going to, and there's some of that too. There are those officers who I'm going to beat you up because I can. In that situation, whether you comply or not, it didn't really matter. It didn't matter. But I think that those are fewer. And I think that a lot of things get heightened because the citizen who may know a little bit about the law and the rights may resist this, give me your ID. And because you're right, the time to fight is after I did all that stuff, it was total compliance. And now you have to prove that I did something that wasn't compliant. And especially if I didn't have any warrants or anything like that, like, hey, you just picked them because you could. You're right. That's a much easier fight to fight there than it is on the street.
And ultimately a much safer one is where I'm trying to. It's
That's
safer
true.
for everybody, right?
That's true.
So, Pastor, I appreciate your time today. I think, as usual, we had great conversation, and I hope our viewers on both sides will appreciate and respect that.
Yeah, I hope so too. We'll have to do it again.
I look forward to it, sir.
All right.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Take care. Blessings to you.